Certain style leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm a racing car passing by like Lady Godiva.
This is a superb performance by Tanni Grey-Thompson, and she's going to create history here. Her third consecutive gold medal.
Through my sporting career and the work I do now, I've learned lots of lessons. One is that kind of life is a conveyor belt. Whatever you achieve, there's always something else that's sort of further on and something else that you have to look forward to. In athletics terms, we operated on 4-year cycles. It was all around Olympics and Paralympics, and we had lots of things that slotted in between all that. But for us, everything was looking forward in 4-year blocks. And for me, the most important thing I probably learned is about individual success. It's not about individuals. There's this big sort of just misapprehension, just this wrong idea in sport, and certainly in athletics, because we're in an individual sport, that I spend all this time on my own. And really for me, the only point I was ever on my own was when I was on the track competing. The rest of the time, you know, I had kind of friends around, I had training partners, I had coaches. I might be at a small race, but still, you know, would be around with people we knew, or would be at a big event like the Paralympics and would have the British team around and behind us. And I always used to find it really strange when journalists used to say to me, you know, you're very individualistic, and by that you obviously can't be a team player. And what's quite sad sometimes, I think, in sport is no one ever wants to listen to the long Oscar speech thanking everyone who's kind of been part of helping build my career. But without my coaches and my training partners, without the guys there, I wouldn't have been able to achieve everything that I was able to do. I had, for a big chunk of my career, 9 to 10 training partners. They kind of changed through the years. But there was one guy I used to train with, and if I had £1 for everyone who said to me, why do you train with this person, I would be incredibly rich. Because this one particular athlete I trained with, when I say athlete, it was kind of athlete. He only used to come training when the sun was shining, and I live in the north of England, so it wasn't a big window of opportunity every year. And this lad was great, but he didn't have much athletic talent in his body. He wasn't very good, really. And he'd admit that, so it's all okay. But we used to train together because actually we just got on really well. And it was about thinking outside the box. It was about thinking how you can be as creative as possible with people around you. And in sport, it is, you know, you can sometimes feel like you're miles apart. And when we used to train with this particular guy, if we'd started off at the same point and we were doing 400 metres, and we were racing against each other, I'd beat him by 200 metres every time. And actually, where's the fun in that? Well, it makes me feel good about myself. And even if I was having a really bad day, I'd feel really good about myself. But actually, that wouldn't have helped him improve, and it wouldn't have helped me improve. So what we used to do when we trained together, we'd set him off, and he'd go off first, and we'd let him go. We'd let him go a bit further. And depending how brave we'd feel, we'd let him get to about 200 metres, and then we'd chase him down. And the rule was, whoever crossed the finish line first won. And it didn't matter that it had 200 metres head start, it was about who got to the finish line first. And for me, that was probably, again, another really useful lesson to learn, because it's about getting the best out of people at every single opportunity. And I trained with people who, like me, were trying to compete at GB. I trained with people who were very recreational. And this one lad who used to come training about 20 times a year, and then if it was raining, he'd sit inside and watch us and be there with a cup of coffee when we finished. But it's about getting that best of everyone who works together. Because for me, that team is important. Without the team I had training, and without the physio, you know, I said the coaches, the training partners, I had a physio, I had a dietitian, I had a sports psychologist, didn't technically have a psychiatrist, although one of my sports psychologists was clinically trained, which is really good. Without those guys, I wouldn't have had the chance to be making the team and being on the start line. And then, only when you've done all that other stuff do you have a chance of winning a race. But if you're not on the start line, you're never going to win it. And without my team, I wouldn't have been in that position. And then really, something that I learned very, very early on in my career was about me being the best that I could be. And actually, that's the only thing I've got control over, because I'm a little bit of a control freak. Is anyone else a control freak? I'm a bit controlling. The day I got married, I had a schedule for everybody, what they were meant to be doing for every 15 minutes of the day. Yeah, that's good. But, you know, for me, I couldn't stop other people training. I couldn't say to Francesca in Italy, can you just not train that hard this winter, because it'd be a bit easier for me. You can't do that. So for me, it was about just being the best I possibly could. And I learned that at the age of 12, because the best girl in wheelchair racing in Britain went to my school, and it wasn't me. And I didn't win a school race, I didn't win a county race, I didn't win a Welsh race, I didn't win a national race, because the best girl in Britain went to my school. And I learned from racing her week in, week out, that the only thing I could do was try to be better than her, because I couldn't stop how good and how talented she was. The final race we did together as juniors, I beat her. And for me, that is probably still one of the biggest races in my whole career, because it was years and years of being beaten, and working hard and going away, and after every single race thinking, right, how can I be better? For her, that was the last race she ever did. She didn't compete after that, because actually she had loads of natural talent and she didn't have to train. She could just turn up, and she knew how hard I was training, and she could see everything I was doing, and you know, sometimes I was closer to her than others. But for me, that was an incredibly important lesson to learn, that, you know, you just be the best you can, and you keep going. And really that was the thing that kept me going through the whole of my athletics career, and the things that I do now, was actually, you need to be aware of what people are doing around you, but actually it's about doing your own thing and keeping focused on your own thing, because that's when you can achieve the best results for you. I'm going to show you some really embarrassing pictures now. This is me at 7 as a brownie, before Dunlop Green Flash was invented. It was a very long time ago. This picture is incredibly important to me, because it's about my whole childhood, it's about my upbringing, and it's about really the way my parents brought me up. I was born with a condition called spina bifida. I could walk till I was 6, and very gradually I became paralysed, so by the age of 7 I couldn't walk. And there were lots of people around who told my parents that the only way that I would have a normal life was if I wore calipers and crutches and I learnt to walk. And for me, it was miserable. I couldn't do anything. I had these really horrible sort of leg irons that I used to have to strap myself into, and I could walk at a snail's pace, and I've got an older sister, and I was always trying to kind of catch up with her and compete against her, and we used to fight a lot, and we used to kind of literally physically fight quite a lot, and she was quite a lot bigger than me. And when you kind of sort of, if I hit her, and you can only turn around like this, you know, I wouldn't have even been facing in the other direction before she rugby tackled me to the ground and beat me up. So my parents just decided, actually, although the wider world's perception of normality was me walking, what was actually best for me, and the best thing for me was having a wheelchair. And for me, that changed my life, because at least meant I had a fighting chance of getting away from my sister before she beat me up, but it also gave me the freedom to be involved in sport and do other things, and be independent. And around this time as well, I remember my dad, he was an architect, and he got out this book, and he kind of showed me all these pictures of these amazing buildings around the world. And it was the Taj Mahal, and it was Sydney Opera House, and it was all these things. And him saying to me, you need to travel, you need to explore, you need to kind of... he used to say to me, education gives you choices. And I remember being 7, sitting there going... And now I say to a lot of young people in sport, education gives you choices. So, you know, he'd be quite proud of that. And I remember him saying to me, you need to be fit and healthy, and you need to get involved in sport, because you need to travel and you need to get away. And last year my dad was really ill. And I kind of wanted to say thank you to him for that moment, because that was another kind of moment in my life where I thought I need to do things, and I need to do things differently, and I need to kind of step away from people's perception of what disabled people can and can't do. And I said to him, do you remember that conversation where you showed me all these pictures? And he sort of went, no. Right. And I said, but you know, because it was like this really... And he looked at me and went, no, I don't remember it. Great. And about an hour later, he sort of came back to me and he said, oh, yeah, I kind of do remember it. And I said, oh, well, that was such an important moment in my life. And he went, oh, right. And he said, actually, your mum and I had decided we didn't want you living at home forever. So, great, thanks for that. There's a bit of a running theme with my parents, but anyway. But for me, that was something important. The other reason is that if you look really closely at this picture, you can see that I'm trying to skip. And it's not really going to happen, is it? Because it just doesn't work. But my parents brought me up to believe that you should try everything you can, and you should make the most of every opportunity, because the only way that you'll find out you can or you can't do things is by trying. And it actually probably took me quite a long time to realise I couldn't skip. But, yeah, probably longer than it should have done. But for me, it was about trying. It's about seeing what you can achieve. And for me, that played a really important part in my life, because being a wheelchair user in the mid-70s was very different from how it is now. You know, there were no accessible toilets. I wasn't allowed to go to the cinema with my friends because I was a fire risk. I wasn't allowed to stay in mainstream education. I ended up staying in my local primary school because my headmaster at the time recognised mainstream education was the best thing for me and just forgot to tell the local education authority that I was in a wheelchair. And if anyone from the LEA came round to visit the school, I was kind of hidden away. I do remember one point where I was kind of pushed into a cupboard, and in a very positive way. I mean, not in a bad way, in a really good way, because it was important for my education to be there. And for me, the first time I realised I was going to be treated differently because I was in a wheelchair was when I was 11. And I was meant to be going to the same high school that my sister was at. And then the headmaster found out I was in a chair. And he wrote a letter, which we've still got, which is so funny, which said, we don't take people like Tanni at our school. I went, OK. And it was 1981. The 81 White Paper on Education had just come out, and it was my first experience of politics. And my dad got hold of a copy of it, read it, and then he threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to be educated in a mainstream environment, and I got into mainstream school. And for me, again, that was something that was really important, because without that, I wouldn't have done my O-levels, I wouldn't have done A-levels, I wouldn't have gone to university. I went to Loughborough, just down the road. I went there because of the sport. And I wouldn't have been able to kind of build on all those different things to then have my career as an athlete. Also at university, I did a politics degree. I do remember very boldly in my final year, just before I graduated, saying to my professor, I'm never ever going to get involved in politics because that's for losers. I know. I got put into the House of Lords last year, and my professor's still alive, and he remembered. And he sent me a very nice email which said, "You are now a loser." Yeah, OK. Thank you for that. Why do they remember those things? Anyway, you know, but again, without all those things kind of as building blocks, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do the things I'm doing now. And really, it all came back to what happened to me at 7 years old. And really, it's about that communication. It's about, because in the British team, we're all working towards the same goal. We're all trying to win as many gold medals as possible, because we have lots of competition between the sports. So between big sports like athletics and swimming, we have our own personal competition because we want to win more gold medals for our sport than the other, and we want to be seen as the kind of the sport that really boosts the rest of the team. And amongst some of the smaller sports, they have a similar sort of level of competition. But also, as a nation, we have that competition. We have the medal table. We want to be up there. So everyone is trying to work in the same direction. But actually, as a British team, we all have slightly different ways of getting there. I used to carry these pictures in my training diary because they're kind of 4 athletes that I admire for all different reasons. And again, it comes back to, it doesn't matter how successful you are. Everyone has moments of self-doubt. And for me, if you look at the women in the picture, you know, Jennifer Capriati was on the world tennis scene at 13 years old, was pushed to become the youngest tennis player in the world on the tennis circuit because she had so much natural talent. At 14, she went off the rails and was told she was washed up and wouldn't achieve by the world's media. You look at Paula, who's been through more ups and downs in her career than anyone could have ever thought possible. But actually, it's her belief in herself. It's her belief that she can be the best marathon runner in the world that keeps her going. And she learns from every mistake that she's made. And someone like Kelly, you know, Kelly, with 1 winter's training behind her, went to Athens and won 2 gold medals. She was one of our most successful British athletes on the track in terms of Commonwealth and Olympics and the other things that she'd achieved. But the gold medals had always eluded her. And she knew. And I guess this is about belief. It's about believing that you're doing the right thing. And it's so easy if you listen to people on the outside or you listen to someone who doesn't understand the situation. In our case, journalists who always have a view on what you're doing or what you're not doing. You know, and most of them have never competed in their lives. So actually, what do they really know? They have a view. And it's about believing that what you're doing is the right thing. And I've got the picture that I've got Matt and Steve. For slightly different reasons. Steve Redgrave is the only guy I've ever met who has carried me up 4 flights of stairs in my chair on his own. I have to say that was when he was probably a bit fitter and I was a lot skinnier. He basically just put his hand underneath my chair there, picked up the back bar and just carried me. I went, I love you. So I told his wife that, it's absolutely fine. I'd say that was only topped by being involved in the Olympic bid for 20. Win. Going to beat Paris. And then gradually the momentum changed and people started to believe we could do it. And I was in Singapore for the final announcement, and we had to go to a meeting there was no lift, I couldn't get there. And Steve was there, and he said, "Oh, I'll give you a hand." And he said, "Oh, actually, I'll need someone else to help me." And he said, "Oh, Dave, give me a hand carrying Tanni up the stairs." It was David Beckham. So I had Steve Redgrave that side, I had David Beckham that side. I was very cool, got to the top, said, "Thanks, guys, really appreciate it." Went straight to the toilets to ring my best friend. Also rang my husband, who is very quick and witty and amusing and can say those one-liners. And he said to me, "Do you realise something, Tanni?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "You're probably the cheapest woman Beckham's ever picked up." Anyway, moving on. The reason I have this picture is Matt. Actually, Steve and Matt, phenomenal athletes, but won 4 Olympic golds. And I was with him a little while ago, and a journalist said to him, "Didn't you fancy trying to win 5 golds like Steve then?" I thought, and he said, "I didn't row to be a Trivial Pursuit question. I didn't row to be who's the second British man to win 5 Olympic rowing golds." I went, wow. That's why he went to Oxford and I went to Loughborough. And I said to him afterwards, that was really good. And he said, every journalist who speaks to him asks him the same question. And it's that kind of lack of understanding about what he was trying to do. He rowed for as long as he wanted to row. And when he didn't want to row anymore, when he didn't think he could do any more in the sport, he walked away and he did something else. And now has a very successful career working in the media and doing speaking and doing lots of other things. And for me, it's not getting caught into believing that you should do what other people want you to do just because that's something they believe. And it's about having that strength of character to say, no, do you know what? I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to do something that's really important to me. Can you plan for success? I love planning. Do you know, I really like planning. I like planning because I'm deeply disorganised. I lose my car keys, I don't know how many times a day. I'm constantly having to ring my phone to find it. My husband gets so irritated when I say, "Have you seen my phone?" I've never lost my child, so I think I'm doing really well on that. Not for very long anyway, no. But for me, I'm also, in my athletics career and the stuff I do now, there's always a lot I want to do. I'm not sure ambitious is the right word, but I always kind of want to fill my time, and there's always lots of things that I want to achieve. I always have a big list of things that I want to try and do and change and make better. So for me, the only chance I have to do all those things is actually to plan and try and be incredibly well organised. Because if I'm not, then I will just sit and watch TV all day and eat chocolate biscuits, which is sometimes quite nice to do, but it kind of doesn't get you very far in kind of work. So for me, everything that I did as an athlete and everything I do now is just broken down into 4 steps. As an athlete, it was winning gold medals. And now it's much harder to pinpoint those things. It's much harder to say, do you know what, I'm going to make an absolutely brilliant speech on the pensions bill. Because that's a bit harder to achieve. But I know the things that I want to try and do in the House of Lords in terms of my areas of knowledge is education and health and sport. So there are things within that I want to try and do. And there's also things where I don't know a lot about science and technology, but those are the things I want to try and learn more about. So I've still got a list, and I've still got kind of dream list of all the things that I want to try and do. And then, where are you now? We used to spend a lot of time as athletes working out our starting points. We used to do a lot of SWOT analysis. We also used to do a lot of testing in the lab. Again, it's much, much easier as an athlete. We used to test in a lab. We used to have, measure our expired air samples. We used to have our blood taken. That all gives you a really good idea of your starting point. It's much harder to do now in terms of knowing the things that I have to improve. But the guys that are around me in a sporting context are still around me now. And still, my training group have gone above and beyond the call of duty and anything that they have to do. They listen to my speeches on the Parliament channel, which I think is so sweet of them, because they're not always the most interesting. And they kind of give me feedback. And I have to say, it's sometimes not always feedback that I want from them, because they'll say to me, "That was really boring, Tanni." And you go, "Thanks very much. Well, I thought it was quite good." But from people you trust and from people that you know that are trying to have your best interest at heart, that is something that's really important to have. And for me, it's having people around me who I trust absolutely 100%, who are able to give me that feedback is incredibly important. And then spending a lot of time planning. I love lists. Does anyone else love lists? I love lists. Oh, yes, somebody's put their hand up. Thank you. I have a book of lists, and it's probably the third most important thing in my life. My book of lists goes everywhere with me. And again, that's a way that and there's lots and lots of different ways. You know, I'm probably the worst person to give time management advice because I have absolutely atrocious work-life balance. But it's finding the way that things work for you, that you can actually achieve all those things that you want to do. And then, sometimes what sometimes seems the easiest part, but actually in a sporting context is sometimes the hardest things for people to do, is just physically go out and do the things you need to do, whether that was training or it's, you know, I can spend hours rearranging my desk and moving my stapler and thinking about, oh, where ergonomically should I have my stapler and my pen box and my notepad and all those things. But actually, do you know what? It's actually opening your inbox and doing the work and, you know, clearing out your inbox in the order in which your emails come and not putting things off. And I have better days than others, I'll be really honest with that. But actually, there's so many ways that you can be distracted. It's actually not falling into that trap. And again, because there's so many things that I want to achieve in the time that I have, I've become a lot better. And that's come because of the discipline I had to have in sport. That's carried over into the stuff I do now. It's actually not finding excuses to do the things that you don't want to do. And that's actually where I then find that I free up loads of time. Because I can spend lots of time thinking, I'll do that tomorrow.